every once in a while it may be necessary to lead with an apology. And so, I would like to apologize publicly to sheep. In past years, on this Sunday, I have implied that sheep are of substandard intelligence. Okay, I have more than implied it. I may have even used words like dumb and stupid. And that is not right. We should appreciate sheep. They are good at what sheep are for. When we measure them against, our own standards, perhaps they don't measure up. But sheep, in their own right, are fine creatures. I don't know sheep well, but one thing that's fascinating about them, you'll know they're herbivores and they're prey species. They have their eyes on the side of their heads, right? So we've got ours together on the front. They have eyes on the side of their heads. They're masters of situational awareness. I'm appreciating sheep this morning. They're always scanning for movement, potential threats. It's a gift. We've got eyes just on the front of our heads, and we're good at things like driving straight ahead. If sheep could drive, maybe they could finally teach us how to merge. The sheep are among the most gregarious animals. They seek each other out, and honestly, as a herd species, they make the other herd species look like rank amateurs. Like they're only half-hearted, those, herds of cattle. They're just a loose affiliation out there compared to a flock. I have seen a flock turn on a dime like a school of fish. I don't know how they do it. How do they know, We're turning left in 3, 2, 1, and turn. Yeah. They don't count it off. I don't think they do, but I don't know how they do it. They're impressive. And I've learned that sheep are at the very pinnacle of species' ability to recognize and distinguish human faces and human voices. And when you compare that to my ability to distinguish sheep faces and sheep voices, I should be more careful who I am calling dumb. Well, we have lots of sheep in the scriptures today. In the Psalm, one beloved by faithful for generations, beloved by Jews and Christians, one that compares our life with God to the life of a sheep with the shepherd. Then in the gospel, where Jesus compares himself to a shepherd, speaks of the fact that, yes, the sheep know their shepherd's voice. And then Revelation. In Revelation, I know it's always hard to kind of concentrate and catch everything that's happening in Revelation. Primarily there we hear about a lamb. And this is Jesus, the lamb who still is showing the marks of having been slaughtered, it says. And that is how Jesus shows up in most of the book of Revelation, as a lamb. But then in today's reading we hear, and the lamb has become their shepherd. And he leads them to the waters of life and wipes every tear from their eyes. The lamb become a shepherd. I hear that and I think of my high school English teacher. There'd be lots of red ink, pick a metaphor and go with it. But John, who had this vision, and the one who gave him the vision, they knew what they were doing here. But Psalm 23 has held my attention this week in living with these texts. Beloved by the faithful, because it is so rich and so simple. And what a powerful combination that is in this simple prayer, such riches. It's so compact. We sang the whole thing. But so full of details, and I think those details perhaps even gain meaning for us as we pray this psalm through our lives. I remember when it was first pointed out to me that the second half of the psalm basically repeats the first half. The first half, it's all in sheep imagery. And then in the second half, it becomes human imagery. So the green pastures becomes a table set before me, which is what we eat, and you're with me through the valley of the shadow of death becomes, and I'm safe in your house forever. Passing through a valley is sheep imagery, living in a house, human imagery. And I love this psalm because it is so, what the literary scholars would call multivalent. That is, it's really easy to make connections to, and diverse connections, right? At one time in your life, green pastures might mean one thing, and then you pray this psalm again, and green pastures might stand for something else for you. But one way or another, this psalm resonates. One detail that has drawn my attention again this week more than any other that I had never noticed before is that line, "He makes me lie down in green pastures." The significance of lying down. And what I've come to understand is that for those who know sheep, this detail is not lost on them. Because sheep will only lie down in certain circumstances. Unlike other animals, sheep do lay down. There are some that very rarely, if ever, lay down. Sheep will, but only in very specific circumstances that I've tried to enumerate as 3 here. 1, sheep will lie down when they're with other sheep. A solo sheep is a nervous sheep. Sheep on their own do not lie down if they can help it. But a sheep with others might. A sheep who lies down is a sheep who's had enough. If they don't have a tummy full of grass, they're going to be up looking, scrounging for more. But when they're full, they might lie down. And a sheep that feels safe might lie down. Again, if they're not, they're going to be ready to flee. That's their one thing, right? That's what sheep can do. They'll run. They're always going to be scanning for threats. Unless they feel safe, then they might lie down. So if we are Jesus' sheep, I want to ask this morning, how often do we lie down? And I suppose I could ask how much sleep you're getting, and that's an important question. My doctor asks that. It's a good one. If you ever want a sobering statistic, look up how much the average American slept the year you were born and how much the average American sleeps now. And there's no wonder we're all a little cranky and all the other things. But I don't mean so much how often do you stop moving. I mean, how often do you truly rest? This kind of rest that's mentioned in the psalm, the kind that Jesus wants to give us, and he calls it part of abundant life, the rest that restores your soul. And then we might ask what keeps us from having that rest that Jesus came to give. Well, again, it's not an accident that we're given sheep to ponder this week. So let's just track through what puts sheep at ease and what might give us this rest that Jesus wants us to have. First of all, being in the flock. Setting aside safety in numbers, which is certainly part of that for sheep. We'll talk about safety later. But sheep just need each other to calm down enough to lie down. We've been through something of an experiment these last couple of years where we had times of really significant isolation. And, as we begin to process this time, and I think in future years as we look back on this time, we'll say, well, my goodness, there was increased anxiety during that time, and there was this blossoming of conspiratorial thinking during this time. And there was such feelings of alienation during that time, and such anger and hostility. And we'll say, well, of course. We're not so different from sheep, perhaps. When we get isolated, we get anxious. We have these same kinds of problems, but in our human ways. And of course, I say this as one who took the need for isolation very seriously, when that was what we needed for public health, but we can acknowledge that there were costs. Of course, the much bigger problem has been going on a lot longer, and that is our self-chosen isolation, the alienation that comes from the things that we do and that we say, and all of that continues. And for that, there isn't even a good reason. It's not a new problem. It's not just about keeping to ourselves, although sometimes we keep to ourselves too much. But you can be in the same room and still be alienated from one another. We're actually quite good at that. We can live in the same house and be alienated from one another. But we see in Jesus a very intentional work from the beginning to found a community. He didn't call his apostles to follow him one-on-one. He called them to follow him together. And as they called others, to gather them in. And in his resurrection, he cemented that community. We are to be together. I think it's easier to name the practical reasons because there are many. Having others around, and we look out for each other. But there are spiritual reasons as well that protect us from some of those things that happen when we get isolated. There's something about being together that helps us to begin to lay down, to have the rest that restores our souls. But also, like sheep, we need to have enough before we're going to lie down. And there are real threats in this world to having enough. You know, we see in the news the death and destruction in the Ukraine. But I'm afraid we're going to see that death and destruction continue because of the fact that those are a whole lot of fields that aren't being planted. And the death and destruction is going to come to Bangladesh and Africa and other places that import their grain. It's a real fear in this world, and it's a well-founded fear. For us, it might more likely be something like, you're ill and you don't know how you'll get the help you need. Most of us can't. You see those crazy bills. We can't pay out of pocket, as they say, and so how will we get the help we need? Or so many other things we might worry about. Will I have enough? But even with those real threats, I think the biggest threat to having enough is always right here. The biggest threat to having enough is always going to be our perception. Not empty tummy or empty bank account, but our ideas of what is enough and when we can lie down. Our insecurities. Sometimes I'm convinced that our feelings of not having enough are rooted in our feelings of not being enough. I am not enough, we say. And in Jesus, the Good Shepherd, we begin to hear his response, you are enough. And to the concrete needs that are real threats for us, he does give us the community. And haven't we all known people who have very little, but they know they've got people? And if you've got people and we have enough, then I can begin to lie down. Because if we have enough, then we will care for me. But going deeper here, enough first and foremost for us is about our relationship with God, the giver of all good things, the one from whom comes all that we need. If that relationship is in place, then truly we can lie down because enough will be in God's hands. Enough will be as God defines it. I sometimes think about how outside observers observe when we take communion, and I think we can see it through their perspective once in a while as well. Communion, this fascinating thing, you watch all these people line up, and there's some excitement in the room, either shown in one way or another, celebration or formality, reverence. And everybody receives their tiny piece of bread and their little sip of wine, and they walk away, acting like they got just what they needed. Right? Oh, okay, well, I'm good for this week. I'm ready. What's going on here? Jesus is teaching us through this, right? You can lie down. You don't need to be up and scrounging about for more. I've given my very self for you. How much more will I give you everything else? You can lie down, at least for a while, and find rest for your souls. Well, again, maybe we're more like sheep than we'd care to admit, because I think the third thing applies as well. We'll lie down and rest when we feel we're safe, and if we don't, we won't. We don't have sheep's eyes, but in our hearts we do. We're always scanning for threats. And if we scan enough, either we just start finding threats where there may or may not be one, or We scan for threats and there are none. Well, but then we scan again, right? I wonder sometimes if we do ourselves a disservice by the way we arrange our lives. I see our entertainment. I can see the appeal of a horror movie or a true crime story or any of those kinds of things. They help us deal with our fears, don't they? There's a power, the power of a good story. But is there a limit to how much of that we want to consume as entertainment? Will it make us more fearful? I wonder. I'm more concerned about the world of information we live in. There is so much, and what a blessing to have so much information accessible to us. But what it includes is the opportunity to see threats our ancestors would have never known about. And then, we have news and other sources of information that focus on the, it's wolves 24/7. And they know that that keeps our eyeballs on the screen, and the advertisers like that. And so they do it more. But where it's most insidious, and I think a greatest concern for me is whether it's news or entertainment or however we get our information, there can be some influence there that very insidiously begins to teach us to see one another as threats in ways that I think are very unhealthy. Right? The threats are real, but if we're taught again and again to see our neighbors as the threat, then the very ones who ought to be flock with us are ones that we're going to keep pushing away and are going to keep us from lying down. For most sheep, there is only one thing that can turn off that constant scanning for threats, and that is the presence of the shepherd. If the shepherd is there, I can be done scanning. If I look and there he is, I can lie down. The better they know the shepherd, the more they will relax. We could all get to know our shepherd more, but here's what we know. He knows what it's like to be a lamb, and he puts our lives above his own. That's a good shepherd. So lie down a while. Of course, there is work for us to be up and doing. Jesus says he has other sheep that aren't part of the fold yet. This message of rest, isn't this exactly what our world needs? Real rest. So many people need just exactly what Jesus has given to us. But we aren't going to be able to share it until we ourselves are experiencing it. So that's what I'm going to be working on. And I encourage you and invite you as well. He has led us in green pastures. Lie down a while beside the still waters, and he will restore our souls.